So, welcome to everyone joining. We are joined here with our partners, Gorilla, and we'll give it a few minutes for more people to join. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. It's always nice to see where our audience is from. I'm Danielle Nemeth from Sage Publishing, and we are very pleased to be joined by our partners, Gorilla. From Gorilla, we have Johanna Tomczak, and she's joined by our guest speaker, Max Mawby. I'll hand over to Johanna in a minute, but you'll shortly see a poll pop up, so feel free to answer those questions while we do intros. Also, we'll do a Q&A at the end, so feel free to put any questions you have into the Q&A tab. Johanna, over to you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Danielle. I'm very excited to be here today. So my name is Johanna Tomczak and I'm research specialist at Gorilla Experiment Builder. I'm your host today, and I've been an academic myself, and now I'm helping researchers at Gorilla to take their studies online across the behavioral sciences. The first thing I would like you to do is to rename yourself with your name and then your university and organization, and you can tell us in the chat actually where you're dialing in from. It's always good for us to know where people are coming from, and you can also let us know which kind of research area you're working on at the moment. For example, I might put online research methods, as it's quite a general topic I'm working on, just so we have an idea. And obviously Danielle has made the poll available, so we'll also have a look whether you've done online research before and whether you've come across Gorilla before, or whether that's a completely new tool to you. We are running this webinar as a joint webinar series with Sage, and we're very excited to pick things up from where we left them just before the summer. And today we're going to dive into advanced functionality for experimental psychologists. For those of you who are new to Gorilla, we are a platform that allows you to go far beyond surveys. We have core tooling, a survey tool, a task builder for reaction time tasks, and an experiment builder for linking those questionnaires and tasks together. Today, our topic is talking about novel protocols using Gorilla, and that entails UX and UI simulations for cyber psychology research and UX and UI research itself, but also social media research. It's been possible to run simulations for a while, but now, thanks to the work we've been doing in partnership with Max Mawby and his team from Things Insights, it's much easier to run more realistic simulations. So just to give you a quick overview of what we will be covering today, first of all, I'll start with a quick introduction to Gorilla. Then we'll follow a demonstration how to do a social media and an app and website simulation. And after that, I will be handing over to our brilliant collaborator, Max Mawby, who will tell you all about the research he's done on mis and disinformation. And then at the end, we will have quite some time left for a Q&A session. So during the entire webinar, we would encourage you to put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and at the end, Danielle will help us sieve through all the questions to make sure we can answer most of them. Today's session is also going to be recorded, so we will send a recording around to any attendees today. Feel free to also send it to any colleagues and friends who couldn't make it, but who were interested in the topic we are talking about today. Okay, with that being said, let me just start my screen sharing, and we can jump straight into so that I can show you what Gorilla is and explain in a bit more detail what we're doing here. Let me just start my screen sharing and my presentation. Okay, so this is what we do at Gorilla. We can host surveys, tasks, games, multiplayer studies, shops, and UX and UI simulations. As I've said, my name is Johanna Tomczak, and I've done a PhD at the University of Leeds during the pandemic. And actually, I had all those grand ideas about what my research would look like. I really wanted to go into neuroimaging and use all kinds of cool methodology But it turned out that the pandemic happened and that I had to move all my research online. This, however, gave me the opportunity to use Gorilla, and it was actually a really positive experience in the end. It allowed me to finish my PhD on time. Many people actually spend extra time writing up, take 4 years or even more. And although I had an undergraduate in computer science, Gorilla was still a lot faster and easier for me to use. So that made it possible for me to join the company after I had finished my PhD, or actually during the last year of my PhD. And I'm now quite happy working here and being in touch with a lot of different research projects. Now, how we see the research landscape here at Gorilla, let me go back to my presentation, there we go. Our founders saw the research landscape as the following. There were online survey tools that were easy, but not sufficiently powerful, really. And then there were some people who were coding in the lab, and some very few people were coding online and setting up their own servers. Our founder, Joe Evershed, believed that it should be possible to create an online platform like the survey tools which are around, that supported a far wider range of psychology methods, so that cognitive and behavioral scientists could also benefit from the increased speed, scale, and reach of online participant pools, and make the world a better place based on evidence. And that's how she created Gorilla. Now, we've succeeded with that mission, really, because with Gorilla, we've made scientists' life easier. Let's take a look at this case study from Jade. Before Gorilla, it took Jade 2 months to build a task, 6 weeks of testing face-to-face. She then implemented the same task in Gorilla, and in 1 to 2 hours, she was able to build her task, and in 1 hour, she had collected all the data she needed. The old way really wasted 3 months of her time, or a quarter of the year on just one study. Over the course of a PhD, which typically includes 5 studies, that's 1.25 years, and that time can be used for the write-up and the dissemination of your findings. So you spend more time actually doing the science you enjoy, have holidays, have a work-life balance, rather than sitting with your participants in one room. We regularly save researchers months of time, money, and frustration by giving them these tools we've created that make their lives just so much easier. Okay, here's a little quick video of Gorilla functionality. We support traditional reaction time tasks. We can have any type of stimulus in any response, and you get accuracy reaction time measures. We also have a survey tool that does all the complicated things that experimental psychologists need, like the matrix survey tool, and we can support scoring and branching and subscales as well, so you can have several different questionnaires at the same time. And then you link your tasks and questionnaires together in an experiment tree with randomization and counterbalancing, and we see some incredibly sophisticated experiments. I think the biggest tree I've seen has had more than 100 nodes. We also have advanced functionality like eye tracking, mouse tracking, audio stimuli, microphone recording, webcam recording, drawing tasks, and more. I'll show you more videos of some of those later. I quite like this quote from Joe Devlin, who said that Gorilla was a methodological game changer. It allowed us to test for a wider range of questions, reaching populations that were previously impossible to reach. Hopefully, that gives you a little bit of an idea of the new possibilities in online behavioral research that go far beyond surveys. And with these new possibilities, researchers are collecting a lot of data. We've recently, that was last year, 2023, published a paper about what 1 million participants tell us about the online research. Here at Gorilla, we see so many studies, and this paper, we looked at all the studies launched during just 1 year. So those 1 million participants were actually our participants during 1 year. And what we found is that in terms of sample sizes, most participants that we see on our platform are either in medium or large studies. So that means 25% are in large studies, which includes over 500 participants per study. So these are samples which are not really possible to do in the lab or would take a lot of time. In terms of study length, what we've observed is that the average study length is about 18 minutes for online studies. Attrition doesn't seem to be a problem. We've seen that across different lengths of studies, we've still seen the same number of participants who were successfully able to complete their study. And then in terms of completion rates, there was anything from 50% where we've used social media recruitment to up to 84% of complete participants, which is ID-based policy. So that means we're using an external recruitment service. If you're interested in reading more about this paper, Claire's going to drop you a link in the chat and you can have a look at what we found out, because there's a lot more to it as well. Now, I would like to talk about the online research benefits for a little bit. First of all, why should you do online research? I would concentrate on the speed, because it allows you to spend more time on the actual research rather than babysitting your participants. I'm quoting here Dr. Dan Walker from Oxford University, who I talked to recently in a case study. And second, scale. Working with researchers and participants internationally and moving away from psychology undergraduate research samples allows us to reach a much wider sample of participants. And then in terms of reach as well, by choosing your favorite recruitment policy, you get access to exactly the sample you're looking for. You don't have to just put your study on social media. You can actually really select the sample. And these benefits allow us to do great science, collect more high quality data, get more publications, more knowledge, more improvements to the world, and all of that in less time, as we said, for the speed of online research. A couple of months ago, we hosted a workshop on UX and UI studies. Today, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of examples how to create website and social media simulations for cyber psychologists with Gorilla's simple graphical user interface. Let's move on to the first example we've got here, which I would like to walk you through. So in this example, we've got a task which is a susceptibility to scam emails task. So with that task, we are simulating an email inbox where participants have to make a judgment whether an email is spam or not. The design behind this task is a two-way forced choice task where we have several different trials, and we've got a timing countdown for each of the responses participants are giving. And then the data we're collecting with this task would be the accuracy and reaction times of participants' reactions. Now, because that is all very, very abstract to just talk about the study like this, we've actually created a task like this, and I would like to show you what this would look like in our Gorilla tools so you get a better idea of what's going on. Let me just stop my screen sharing of the presentation, and we'll move directly into that task which I've created in Gorilla here. So we are in Gorilla, and I am going to give you a quick overview, just a preview of the task so you understand exactly what's going on behind the scenes in this task here. Let's just have a look. First of all, we've got this introduction where we ask participants to put in their name, and then on the next screen, they will be asked to identify whether an email is spam or whether they think this is a safe email. So I'm going to input my own name into the task. And once I've done that, you will be able to see that we are going on to the next trial, or actually starting the trials. So if I click start here, you can see we've got an email in our inbox, and we also have a counter which is running down in time. I think I had 45 seconds here to decide whether this email is spam or whether it is safe for me to click on anything in here. What we've customized is the entire part you can see on the left. We've got the headline of that email here. We've got the email address it came from. We've got the name of the sender as well. And then we are now modifying, well, we're looking at one example of the text of that email. And I still have to make a decision. So I'm going to say, okay, this looks safe. And that was correct. See how I got the feedback at the bottom. We've just moved on to the next trial. And I actually think you can see this is now a different sender and a different email text we're using here. Our countdown started again. And I now need to decide whether this is spam, and I think it is. So I'm going to click on spam here for this one. Now, what I would like to show you as well is that you've got a scoring at the bottom here where you can see how many emails got correctly identified. This is all calculated by Gorilla in the meantime. And you can see that at the top, I've got my name, and this is the name I entered when starting the task at the beginning. So it is really a customized experience for each participant. I think this is spam, so I'm going to click on spam again, and we'll have a look at the 2 more emails I've got. Just to note that each time I click on one of those response options, we're actually moving on to the next trial. And what happens, you might have noticed that, but it's quite quick. There is a progress bar which shows just before opening the email to suggest that the next email is loading at the same time. So I'm going to choose here again, spam. This looks like a spam email to me. There you go. You have noticed now probably the progress bar, which was at the top of the screen. Again, we've got a spam email here. So I'm going to click spam again. And I think then we've got one last email that looks like a safe email to me. So in this case, I'm going to click on save here. And this is actually, oh no, there's one more, spam again. And this was the end of my task. Now, what Gorilla allows you is to customize all the content you've just seen in this task. And you can actually do that by having a look at the email screen we've created here. On that email screen, this is how everything is set up in Gorilla. You can see this is now actually just a screenshot. There is a lot of things going on in the background, but this was by no means a real inbox that you've seen so far. First of all, we've got the background image, which applies to everything you can see here in the middle of the screen. And then you can see what's highlighted in red is the component this belongs to. So here we can see we're drawing in a name, and we can change this content with every trial. So here we've got the email address, and we've done the same for, again, the subject, the body of the text, which is this one in the middle. And we then have our response options here for the participants to click at, and we're calculating the score in the background for this task. This is how you could set up this type of email task, and it would allow you to study any sorts of cyber psychology tasks in the same way by just creating screenshots of the specific components you wanted to create. This task was actually made by my colleague Jamie, who's very good with all the visual stuff. So we've done some editing of the different components we've used here. But if we just go to the Stimuli tab, you can see all the material we've used in the background here. We've got even Jamie's profile photo, which is used on the emails, as you've seen here. This is drawn into so it figures in the task. But everything we're using is just within this tab. These are the different accounts we're using. And for the email text, we've got that stored in what we call the spreadsheet. So we're able to just draw in the content that is listed here in the spreadsheet, which means that we only really have to create this screen once, and each time we can have different content populating the task. Okay, this is the first example I wanted to show you, but I've got another example, and this is more about a social media simulation. So for any of you who are interested in that, we will quickly have a look at the social media one. Let me just start off my presentation again. Where was I? I don't know, I'll just go through it. There we go. So the second task is about emoji conformity. And what we're doing here is that we've got this main task where we simulate a social media post with manipulated engagement that participants can see. You can see on the right-hand side, we've got a photo here of Oasis. And below that photo, you can see different emojis and a number that gives you how many people reacted to that post. This is all, again, created with screenshots within Gorilla, and it works as a free engagement task through Gorilla's social media zone. What we have here is several trials with different posts. It could be used as a between participants design or a randomized controlled trial, so that you have different posts, and on these different posts, you've got different emotional reaction. And what you want to study is the reaction, whether participants' reactions will be influenced by whatever they've seen below the picture here. The data we would be getting out of the task would be responses and reaction times to each social media posts from the participants. And as I've said, you could run this as a between participants design where you have the same image with the same text, but with a different emotional reaction from participants that is displayed below, and study whether this influences how participants conform or whether they use a different emoji. Now, let's have a look at that again in Gorilla. I'm going to stop the screen sharing for this one, and I'm going to go back to my project for today, and we'll have a look at how this task works. I'm going to give you a preview again so we can walk through the task and see what happens. In the following task, you will be shown a series of social media posts. All the images we're using here are taken from the sun and the mirror just to give us some emotionally loaded images and posts that we can use. So we're going to have a look at those in a second. Here, we've got our first post, and as I've said, this is all created in Gorilla, so we're using the phone as a background, and we've got all the other content which you can see on this post. That is all drawn in from the spreadsheet and can be manipulated by the researcher. So if I wanted to react to this post, you can see the reactions we got here, a heart eye smiley, and we had a thumbs up, I think, as well. I could now click on react as a participant, and this would allow me to choose between the different emojis. I'm going to choose this one here and click on next. There we go. That looks nice. And now I could also react to this one here. You can see there's some angry faces on this one, and that shows us maybe I want to react angry as well. So with this task, we're really studying how the behavior of the set or fake participants here influences the behavior of any participant taking part a bit later. I'm just going to click through the other posts we've got. We've got a different range. You can have as many as you'd like. We're just using the same structure over and over again, where we have this post and an emotional reaction, and participants can react to it. They can also repost it to their own timeline or comment on it if they wanted to. That is also possible through the social media zone. Let's go back to the editor and have a look at how this works behind the scenes. On the trial, you can see we've got the background, which is literally everything except what is inside the phone at the moment. If we go to our stimuli tab, you can see this is the phone image. This is what the background looks like. And then what we have here is the social media zone, and you can see a lot of green happening here. This means we are linking again to our spreadsheet where we draw the content from. So in this case, the content applies to the account image. This is the one on top here. We've got the account name. This is the mirror, which we can see next to that. And then we've got the post text, which is this one here, the post image, which is the image we can see in the middle. And then we've got all sorts of comment counts and reaction counts. And we can also manipulate those numbers. As I've linked them to the spreadsheet here, is if we go to the spreadsheet, you can see that for this specific trial, where we're looking at Prince Harry, we can see that we had 502 comments, 5,356 reactions, and 1 like and 1 love. Now we can change the content here. We could add a different emotional reaction instead, and this would allow us to study exactly how participants react depending on the content they're seeing in front of them. We go back to that, you can see we've also used this overlay component, which is really important because it allows us to make sure that the scaling works for everything we're doing. So whether or not our participants are using a mobile or are using a computer, a laptop, a tablet, whatever, this component will always stick to the background component, and it will scale in relation to the background component we're using. So that is very important, and it allows us to have the same format all over different tasks. And for online research, that's really helpful because we don't really know what device our participants are going to be using. So it allows us to just keep the formatting of the task consistent. Okay, let me stop my screen sharing because I'm most excited now about Max Mawby's research and what he has done to make the social media zone work for him. Over to you, Max.
Thanks, Johanna. Yeah, delighted to be here talking about this, and I suppose it's really awesome to see how far Gorilla have taken it. So I suppose the background to this is that we came to Joe and Gorilla, when was it? Like kind of autumn last year, and was like, could you build this kind of thing for us? And they were like, yeah, we've been thinking about doing this kind of thing for a while. And having built a number of simulators, I suppose the really nice thing about this one is the quality of the data set that you get out, or the data file that you get out. I've built some shonky simulators that may look great in terms of the participant, but actually in terms of the quality of the data file you get out, you just spend ages relabeling stuff and trying to work out what is what. And I suppose the really nice thing about doing it through Gorilla is that you get a nice clean data file. And obviously it looks beautiful as well, as Johanna's already shown you. Right, so I will share my screen. So I'm going to talk about the project that we ran, which launched the Social Media Zone. I'll introduce very briefly who we are. So my name's Max Mawby. I'm the Managing Director for Applied Behavioral Science at a company called Thinks Insight and Strategy. And this is a project we did around Christmas last year, which was looking at addressing election mis and disinformation in 2024. There's a big general election in the UK. If you're UK based, if you're not, I mean, this is part of elections across the democratic world in 2024. So hopefully a nice relevant area of research. So we are a B Corp. So we're a business that balances purpose with profit. And what we do is we conduct this type of research for clients. And what you can see for those of you who have a cognitive and behavioral science background is that my team is just one of kind of 4 pillars within the business. And actually what's really exciting when you get across into applied work is actually being able to work across all of those pillars and really be method neutral. The other cool thing about working specifically at Thinks is that we work across public, where often the challenges are big and difficult, and you have to use rigorous methods, but maybe it takes a long time and doesn't have so much impact. private, which often actually is much quicker to turn around. You see much more impact much more quickly, but perhaps the onus is much more on the outputs than it is on the methods. And on charitable, who often have the most interesting projects of all, and where you can really see impact often very quickly. And you can see a lot of our partners there. So, an overview of the project we did. So, as I was saying, there are many elections in 2024. The UK's one is obviously important to those of us in the UK. There are big ones in other large democratic countries. There are ones across the world. So, it's a huge year for democracy. And one of the key reasons that we came to Gorilla and asked them to build this social media simulator was that mis and disinformation is spreading faster than ever before online. And I've had a hypothesis from previous research. I talked about other simulators I've built. You know, that hypothesis is that essentially that spread is supercharged by the social media environment. And the problem, for those of you who are familiar with Cambridge and Sander van der Linden and all his collaborators, their work is that they show that actually being exposed to misinformation can actually just increase your subsequent belief in misinformation. And it's not enough to like go and help people like after they've fallen down the rabbit hole. Because as that picture shows, any of you who are US based, once people have gone down the rabbit hole, you know, it's actually very difficult to treat that, and you know, pretty bad outcomes can happen. And for any of you who followed news about the UK, I think this is actually really interesting, and you might want to think about these results as you think about what happened with the riots in the UK over the summer, where actually there's a lot of hypothesis that maybe it was not just the spread of mis and disinformation on social media, but specifically the people who were amplifying it, people who are perhaps charismatic authority figures, who maybe were actually supercharging the spread on this network that I think we already know does supercharge the spread. So this is research conducted last Christmas. Obviously, there's always new hypotheses to research, and maybe I'm inspiring some of you to either get in touch with us or indeed do your own research, which focuses on updated hypotheses. So what we did, so within Gorilla, we did an online RCT. Outside of Gorilla, we did some focus groups and NatRep surveys. I don't have time today to talk about those. I'm just going to talk about that RCT. But from the overall project, we found 4 things. So firstly, election mis and disinformation, it does pose a threat to the UK. Secondly, deepfakes, which is something that people are really worried about, does appear to be particularly powerful. People engage with it, and you can see that in the data from the simulator. Next, and for those of you who are familiar with the literature, playing a 45-second inoculation game meaningfully and significantly reduces amplification of disinformation in the experiment. Maybe that's not surprising to you, those of you who know the literature. It's always nice to replicate, but I think it's really, really relevant when you look at the content we tested. And that's a cool thing about having a simulator. You can just put new content into it all the time. And then finally, we were trying to get people to put out an optimized inoculation game ahead of the 2024 election. And I can talk a little bit about some of the engagement we had to try and get that out. So experiment, it's a randomized control trial. So 3 arms, 1,650 people, drawn from a large nationwide UK panel. We stuck them through the social media simulation, which was built, as Johanna has shown, on Gorilla. And we showed them a mix of legitimate and mis and disinformation content. Talk more about that in a moment. And we designed 2 interventions. So the first one, subject flagging. I'm sure those of you who are on Facebook over the pandemic will recognize little tags at the bottom of the post. And the second one, inoculation, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So you can see a video of the first edition of Social Media Simulator. I'm not sure how much you've updated it, Johanna, but this is the basic functionality that we came to Gorilla and wanted to have and wanted to build. And you can see the structure of the experiment on the left there. I'm not going to go through that due to time. So we worked with two fantastic collaborators of mine, the Office for Statistics Regulation in the UK, who often have to challenge misuse of official statistics, often around elections, and Full Fact. Those of you who are familiar with the world of online mis and disinformation will know they're a charity that are dedicated to identifying and often debunking mis and disinformation online. So we worked with them to select mis and disinformation that was electoral. So you can see there's a politician in the UK who now is the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. So you can see there's a deep fake that we tested of him up in the middle. But there's also kind of other stuff that just is out there. Like on the left, there's a picture of carrots, which you probably can't read it here. But the mis and disinformation is essentially that they are, it's looking like a big supermarket in the UK is selling carrots grown in Chernobyl. So lots of mis and disinformation posts that we tested in the experiment. And specifically, we tested 5 different bits of election mis and disinformation. And I'm going to talk more about the deepfake in a moment. But you can see the kind of stuff which is out there on social media. And I'd highlight for the updated hypotheses that some of you may wish to explore. We weren't actually focusing in here on the messenger effect or on kind of authority effects. You can see these are kind of fairly nondescript messengers. So I'd be really interested in someone who wants to do some more research, which is focusing more on messengers than it is on content. So as I said, we've got the control, which is just your basic social media interface. We've got subject flagging, which I was talking about a moment ago. It's essentially something that Meta or Facebook often have implemented in their platform. It's easy, it's scalable, it's quick, just a little kind of tag. And then we've got the inoculation intervention. So I've been doing research on inoculation interventions for quite a few years, mostly with central government. So unfortunately, most of it's not published. But I have a view that actually most inoculation interventions can be delivered in about as quickly as you've just seen that video. And that there are other things you can do, like for those of you who are familiar with the behavioral science literature, you can put a checklist in at the end and have calls to action as we did at the end. So we tested the control against subject flagging, against the inoculation. And for those of you who are still awake, I'm sure you are making a prediction yourself about which arm will result in the highest engagement with mis and disinformation, which will result in the lowest. So I'm not going to talk about the inoculation anymore. I'm just going to show you. So what we've got when you chart it as a simple bar chart is you have 38% who are reacting to false posts in the control, and you see a significant drop to 32% in the inoculation, which is fantastic. Replicates what we think about the inoculation interventions. What is really important if you're a social media simulator, and this is when I'm talking about the other data that you can do when you're using Gorilla, is that we could also show reaction rates for legitimate posts as well. And what you can see is what any person who's running a social media site would want to see. In the gold bars, you've got almost no reduction in reaction rates at all, whereas the trend line for false posts in the blue bars is looking much, much steeper. So really nice result from the point of view of the platforms there. For those of you who are into odds ratios, I really like this one because it just shows how we are confident in the reduction that we've seen from the inoculation intervention. But although it appears that subject flagging does something, it's maybe not an intervention that I'd kind of bet the house on. But specifically, when you drill into the data, I suppose the thing that I would highlight is that deepfakes did seem to be a really, really problematic form of content, in that they were the most engaged with type of electoral mis and disinformation that we tested, but they were also seemed, and I appreciate this is exploratory analysis, but they also seemed to be the most treatable. So yes, it's a problem, but also is it a problem that we can treat? That was a really interesting finding from our research. So that's only a very quick kind of canter through the headline findings. What we were trying to do after this, and for those of you who either are already in applied work or wanting to get into it, this is the really fun bit, right? You do experiments to enable you to take this kind of chart to a government body or a non-governmental organization and go, well, look, we can actually have a positive impact ahead of the election, for example. We can actually stop the spread of these types of things. Can you help us to fund this and get it out there? We did an additional survey, which I'm not going to talk about now, but we also did additional qualitative research. And I suppose the final thing I'd leave you with is that experiments are not the only game in town, as I'm sure you all know. If you're running an experiment on gorilla, what you can find is really, really rigorous, robust outcomes. But actually, if you go and talk to people about those outcomes, you can think you can get some ideas for what you can do to maybe improve or change the interventions that you've tested. And you can see actually some suggestions that when we talk to people that they gave us for what you might do to improve the inoculation intervention even further. So that's a very quick cater through. I think it was the first ever social media simulator intervention, and those are the 4 key insights that we took away from this research.
Great, thank you. Max, that was really insightful, really, really interesting stuff. I didn't know that this was happening, really. I mean, the deep fakes and the impact that it can have, I think we all have sort of a cursory understanding of that, but to see it, it's really, yeah. I wish you could give us a little bit more insights, but it's government stuff, so
this
we
was
get what we can.
absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Max. I would be interested in actually knowing what you yourself find most surprising about the results you discovered with your research.
Great
You
question.
know what? It's always fun when you do an experiment. I always say to the team, what are you going to put in as the kicker? Because everybody knows what the primary outcome chart is going to be, or anybody who's engaged with the project knows what it's going to be. And I think actually it was this result that we put in, which is my kind of kicker, which appears to show, I mean, I appreciate it's only one piece of exploratory analysis, but it appears to show that deepfakes, whilst they are pernicious, are also potentially treatable, which is a really exciting potential finding. And if there's anything that I was talking to people across government about ahead of the election, it was like everybody was worried about deepfake. Everybody was terrified that it was going to completely derail the election, there being a deepfake. And I think what I was able to say to people was, well, actually, with a relatively small intervention, a 45-second inoculation game, which is like a little brain training game, we were talking to people about it, there's the potential here to actually address that. So however scary these things might seem, there are probably things that we can do to address it. And I wasn't expecting to see that in the detail of the data. Obviously, if we're in academic world, you go off and you do a fully powered trial, focused on that hypothesis and only. But yeah, I think that was really exciting. And when you do simulations where there's lots of behavioral data, you can, there are interesting things, nuggets that you can add to the primary. By the way, this reflects the primary, so I'm really happy presenting it. But when you've got the richness of the kind of data that you get from a simulation, this is the kind of thing you can do with your exploratory analysis.
That is really cool. Yeah. Do you think there's scope then of implementing some policy changes to increase the use of inoculation anywhere?
So that's the $65,000 question, isn't it? Right? Like you can produce all the evidence you want, but actually it's about persuading someone to invest. And that's why experiments, I think, are so useful and powerful. And so much of my career has focused on them, is because you can give hard, like behavioral data. You can say people actually did this. That said, I have to be honest, it didn't get rolled out ahead of the election. We had lots of interesting discussions across government, across NGOs, but no one actually put their money where their mouth is, which is quite, we ended up on Channel 4 News, which is a big news service in the UK. We're in there's the House magazine, which goes to all members of our parliament. There's lots and lots of national newspaper write-ups as well. But it didn't have an impact ahead of the election. So I think the thing I'd reflect on is that actually, it's really difficult, even with a well-replicated, well-researched intervention like inoculations, to get it out there. And I'm sure there is more we can do. And I think probably for those of you who go, well, we should do something, it's probably going to be NGOs and foundations who will fund this kind of stuff. Because I think governments, the problem is that there'll always be a concern about freedom of speech, which frankly will stymie what most governments, certainly in places like the UK or US, would do. So, you're probably taking a position by inoculating people, as you saw in our video. And if you take a position on a particular piece of what you say is mis or disinformation, that can become part of the political discussion. And I think that's the real challenge for governments. I think absolutely. I've really loved these things since they started appearing in my world anyway, in like 2020, when we were looking at COVID misinformation. But yeah, there's a huge operational issue, which those of us conducting experiments can't answer.
You sound very, very passionate, definitely. You can see that you've got a lot of experience in the mis and disinformation field, and how that could, how it applies to all sorts of areas in the behavioral sciences at the moment. That's really good to see. I just saw the one question in the chat where someone was asking if it's possible to get a free trial of Gorilla. This actually leads me perfectly to the end I had in my presentation. So if I just share my screen with you again, and we will have all the other Q&A questions just in 2 minutes once I've finished that bit. So I was going to say to you that it is completely free to sign up to Gorilla. You can go on our website right now and sign up for an account, and you can try out the tools, put an experiment online, see if you want to make some social media or website simulations on our website. It's completely free for you to use. You can also attend our onboarding webinar, which gives you a good overview of how Gorilla works and how to set up things in the tooling. And then if you have any questions before or during signing up, because your study has particular complexities, then just come and chat to us. Our support team is very helpful, and we can get you started with the tools, and there's no payment involved at the beginning at all, if you just want to try out things. We're also giving away 50 pounds in research credit. So if you're interested in that and you are wanting to sign up for Gorilla anyway, Claire is going to drop a link in the chat where you can do that. You just need to give us your email address, and that will allow us to create the account for you and already credit you £50 worth of research credit. That would be the amount in pounds. Obviously it would be different in the currencies you're working on wherever you're dialing in from today. That will get you up and running in no time. And then my last 2 announcements I wanted to make is that we are also launching a grant scheme quite soon. I think it's about 2 weeks away now, where we are looking into multiplayer research, so where participants interact with each other, and where currently you can be put on the waiting list for that grant scheme if you're interested in it. The second announcement here is, if you want to know more about our advanced tools we offer here at Gorilla, gamification, shopping simulations, and multiplayer experiments, watch out for the next Sage newsletter for our next webinar in just a few weeks. Someone here in the audience I know was interested in human consumption behavior. This is exactly what we'll be talking about in our next webinar. So feel free to sign up again and join us for that next session. And then just as a last slide, I've got our founder, Joe Evershed here. If you want to get in touch with us, you've got our contact details here. Feel free to just drop us an email if you have any questions whatsoever. But we're happy, Max Mawby and I will be answering your questions. So feel free to put anything in the Q&A, and Danielle will kindly walk us through your questions.
Great, thanks, Johanna. I think the first question is for Max. Can you explain a little bit more about the inoculation intervention? So how does it work in practice? I don't know if you can elaborate more than you have, but yeah, feel free to walk us through a little bit more detail if you can.
Yes, let me just get the video up again because I skipped over that. Trying to be quick. Let me just make that. Share. Okay, so this is a video of the inoculation intervention that we built using Gorilla's tools, actually. And what you can see is it's essentially true and false. You answer questions about whether a piece of content that appears above the interface you think is true or false. And then, as you can see, it gives you a little bit of feedback about whether that content is indeed true or false. So that is the theory, is essentially that you expose people to kind of weakened forms of mis and disinformation. In this case, it's weakened because you're basically debunking it if it is false immediately after exposure, and that by exposing people to that, they become more aware of the types of approaches that people who are pushing out mis and disinformation take to actually make it engaging, to make it believable. And maybe if I pull back through and find, yeah, so you can see here. So this is the UK Prime Minister at the time, Rishi Sunak. So this is a doctored image. It seems to be in the UK a thing that politicians have to do. They have to pull a pint. This is you pull using this pump on the bar. And on the left-hand side, there's a lovely pulled pint. That's the real picture. And on the right-hand side, someone has doctored the picture to make the pint look awful. Basically, there should not be that much head on a pint in the UK. You can't see it on this, but they've also doctored the woman's eyes behind to be giving our ex-PM Rishi Sunak a load of side eye. And what you can see is that we're basically explaining to participants what's happened in that doctoring, so they can spot it. So that basically is my approach to inoculation interventions. I know there are other approaches in the literature, is that kind of little brain training game. I actually think you don't need that much engagement. And I think this experiment shows you don't need that much engagement. You need 45 seconds. I can't remember the split of times, but it's like you can do it as quickly as 45 seconds. I think people on average, I think we're doing it in about a minute, but I can't remember the detail. What we added for this project, so I've taken that approach on previous projects, is we added this checklist and the call to action, asking people basically to not engage. And essentially what you're trying to do here, or what we were trying to do, was produce an inoculation intervention that drew on the literature because it exposed and debunked, added some other behavioral science, which is the checklist and a clear call to action, and delivered it in a user-friendly way, which we were able to do because we're building it on Gorilla. So in theory, all of those things pulled together should actually result in a reduction in engagement. And I think it showed it did. The $64,000 question, of course, is how you roll it out and how you get it in front of people in such a way that it actually affects their behavior on social media. And that's something that's, even with online research, I'd say is pretty difficult to do. So that's what's lacking basically about how inoculation interventions work.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was a great example and great explanation. Have you published this anywhere? I think you did say briefly that you can't because it is sort of behind the closed doors of government, but is it somewhere in some form available to
So
view?
we did a poster which we put on our website, which I'll link to now, which is as much as we've published. So plus, I mean, you've seen the deck. That's as much as we've published. I suppose the difference being in an applied team, I definitely published stuff previously, is that our incentives are to sell more work, as opposed to publish. So although I'd love to write this up, we have not yet found time. Who knows? Maybe I'll do it with Johanna next year or something.
We should
Future
definitely
project.
get together and run a project together, and we'll take the writing on us.
Sounds great. I'd love to have you guys back for a webinar once you do that. So brilliant. This is just a general question, I think. In terms of the sort of what are some potential challenges in ensuring that the correlation between variables is not influenced by confounding variables, or sorry, that the correlation observed between variables is not influenced by confounding variables, and how might these challenges impact the validity of research findings? I think this was a question sent ahead of time by one of our audience. Would you like me to read that again? I think I fluffed it a little. Sorry.
I certainly missed the start of it.
I
Right.
did
Okay.
too.
Okay. So it's what are some potential challenges in ensuring that the correlation observed between variables is not influenced by confounding variables, and how might these challenges impact the validity of the research findings?
Oh dear.
It's a bit complicated.
That is a very, very complex question,
Yeah.
and I think it is at the origin everything we do in science, or specifically in psychology, where or the behavioral sciences, where we can never ever control for everything. And we as researchers make certain decisions of variables we are actively observing and variables we are ignoring or we are ignorant to, even where we don't even know that this would play a role in a given research question. I think that is the compromise for us being able to do any kind of research in psychology, is to admit that we can never control everything. That would be my point of view on this question. I don't know, Max, if you've got something to add on it.
Yeah, I'd only add that so much of my career, so I didn't come from academia. I actually came from the civil service and went off and did a master's and then got into this world. So much of my career has been about trying to give the most rigorous evidence possible, not in the best possible world, but possible for the budget, the time, the client that I have. And that's one of the reasons I so love online experimentation and simulation, because it allows us actually to control quite a lot of the environment. It's particularly good that we're all living our lives digitally, and so therefore there's a lot of research questions that are about digital environments, because actually you have pretty much as controlled as I've seen anyway, in research that I've conducted, when you conduct research online in something like Gorilla. As soon as you go into the field, there's just, yeah, all manner of confounds that actually you often struggle to list. So yeah, so that would be my point of view, is that, if you want to minimize that, then do research online, and it's the cleanest way, I think.
We often have users actually asking about how do I control the environment of participants with the research I'm carrying out online. What we reply to that is usually that it is more of an illusion of control, where you think that in the lab you're able to control all sorts of parameters, whereas online, you wouldn't be able to see your participants, you wouldn't be able to make sure they are actually the person they're pretending to be. We find that really with every possibilities you have with online research of implementing checks and attention checks and bot checks and all sorts of measures that can be put in place with online research, we get what Max just said, a much cleaner data set really, and we're able to reach a much wider sample, which allows us then to back our findings by just the sheer amount of participants we're able to recruit.
Brilliant. Thank you for that answer. And I know it was a slightly difficult question to answer off the cuff, but thank you for fielding it, Johanna and Max. We're at time now, so thanks everyone for joining. It was really insightful, really, really great webinar. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for listening in.
Bye.